Imagine a conflict that just bursts onto the scene, lasts less than 2 weeks, and it involves, well, everything from huge missile attacks to these like shadowy drone operations, and then somehow both sides walk away claiming they won decisively. Today we're diving deep into that intense Iran-Israel conflict, the one that flared up and then hit a pretty fragile ceasefire between June 17th and June 24th, 2025. Our goal here is to really cut through the noise. We've got intelligence reports, news analysis, all sorts of sources, and we want to give you the clearest possible picture of what actually happened. You know, the big events, the secret stuff, the impact on people, and the tricky diplomatic fallout. We'll guide you through it, unpack the timeline, and hopefully uncover some of those maybe surprising details. So let's start right there at the beginning, setting the scene for those, 12 really intense days. What were the first moves, the overt actions that really kicked this whole thing off?
Right. Well, we should start with what everyone saw, what made the headlines immediately. On June 19th, there was an Iranian Sajil missile. It hit the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, Israel.
A hospital?
Yeah, a major hospital. And it wasn't, a near miss or minor damage. Dozens were injured. A big part of the hospital was actually disabled.
Wow.
And Israel very quickly called it a deliberate strike on civilians, labeled it a war crime straight away.
Okay. And was that the only major incident early on?
No, not at all. Around the middle of June, maybe a bit before, Iran launched what they called Operation True Promise 3.
Okay.
This was big, a barrage of approximately 150 ballistic missiles.
150?
Yeah, aimed at Israeli military sites, but also cities. Reports indicate about 22 Israelis were injured, and some buildings in Tel Aviv took hits.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second. These are direct, large-scale attacks, a hospital strike, a massive missile barrage. How did these opening moves really set the stage for, well, everything that came next?
Well, they obviously created a huge amount of tension and fear. But what's really fascinating here is that while all this very visible stuff was happening, there was this other layer, a kind of covert chess match going on underneath.
Okay.
And these hidden operations, they had a massive impact on how the whole conflict played out.
Right. So what kind of operations are we talking about?
Well, one key thing, even before Iran launched that big missile barrage we mentioned, Israeli intelligence, Mossad, was apparently running a covert drone campaign inside Iran.
Inside Iran.
Sabotage.
Exactly. Drone sabotage.
Yeah.
The main goal, it seems, was very specific. Disable Iranian missile launchers and their air defense systems, too.
Ah, okay. So trying to weaken their ability to fire back or even fire in the first place.
Precisely. And the impact was, well, pretty crucial, according to some reports. It seems this campaign sharply reduced Iran's counterstrike ability.
How sharply?
Well, initial estimates suggested Iran might have had around 1,000 missiles ready to go.
Wow. Okay. But after this drone campaign, that number apparently dropped significantly, down to maybe around 200.
That's a huge difference, from 1,000 to 200. That really changes the narrative about Iran's capabilities at the moment, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It suggests that, this preemptive covert action might have been just as decisive, maybe more so, than any defensive measures later on.
Interesting. Okay, what else was happening in this sort of hidden dimension?
Well, layered on top of that drone campaign, we had Operation Rising Lion.
Rising Lion, okay.
This involved airstrikes, joint Israeli and U.S. airstrikes, hitting key nuclear facilities inside Iran.
Nuclear facilities, which ones?
Specifically targeting Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. These are names you hear a lot in relation to Iran's nuclear program.
Right. And the goal there?
The stated goals were pretty clear: degrade Iran's uranium enrichment capabilities and also reportedly target key scientists involved in the program.
And did they succeed? What was the claim?
Well, Israel's military claimed its goals for Operation Rising Lion were, quote, fully achieved.
Okay, so you've got the overt missile attacks making headlines. But behind the scenes, this intense covert activity, drones taking out launchers, airstrikes hitting nuclear sites, it really sounds like these unseen actions were potentially shaping the conflict even more than the missile exchanges we saw.
I think that's a very fair assessment. The covert side often dictates the parameters of the overt conflict.
Right. Now, beyond the military stuff, the covert ops, there's always a human cost. What was the impact on ordinary people, particularly civilians inside Iran, as all this was going on?
That's absolutely vital to remember. And yes, the impact was significant and pretty immediate. For instance, after those airstrikes were reported near Tehran, the capital, there was panic. Reports indicate tens of thousands of people just fled the city, heading north towards the northern provinces.
A mass exodus. just like that.
Seems so. And the consequences were predictable, but still severe. Sparked fuel shortages almost immediately. Long queues for basic supplies. Just a major disruption to infrastructure and daily life.
That sounds chaotic.
Yeah.
And scary for people caught in the middle.
Absolutely. And adding to that sense of chaos and isolation, the Iranian government imposed an almost total internet blackout.
A blackout? For how long?
It lasted from June 17th to the 23rd. And the data suggests usage dropped by something like 97% nationwide.
97%. So basically off.
Basically off. The clear intention was, controlling information, preventing news or dissent from spreading during the conflict.
Right. Control the narrative.
Exactly. But the effect on civilians is profound. Cut off from family, from news, from the outside world, it really amplifies fear and uncertainty.
It really paints a stark picture. The overt attacks, the covert ops, and then this profound civilian impact, the panic, the shortages, the information vacuum. So how did this incredibly intense but relatively short period of fighting actually stop? How did it end?
Well, it ended with a ceasefire, a fragile one, brokered primarily by the U.S. president at the time, Donald Trump.
Okay, when did that happen?
It came together on June 23rd, June 24th. Iran reportedly halted fire first at 4:00 GMT on the 23rd.
And Israel.
Israel followed suit about 12 hours later, though interestingly, there were reports that both sides initially violated the ceasefire before it sort of properly took hold.
Not unusual in these situations, I suppose. So the fighting stocks. What happens next? The inevitable victory declarations.
Pretty much immediately, yes. You saw competing narratives emerge straight away.
Okay, what were they?
Well, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, he called the campaign a historic victory, said all threats had been, quote, eliminated.
Eliminated, strong word. And Iran.
Iran's president came out with a similar message, declared success, framed it as successfully defending the homeland against aggression.
So both sides claiming total victory. How does that square with reality? Or at least external assessments?
That's where it gets complicated, as always. There was a U.S. intelligence review conducted pretty quickly afterwards.
And what did that find? Regarding the nuclear sites, for instance.
Their conclusion was quite different from the eliminated claim. The assessment suggested the bombing had set back Iran's nuclear efforts, but maybe only by a few months?
Only a few months. That's a long way from eliminated.
A very long way. And interestingly, President Trump publicly pushed back against that intelligence finding. He refuted it.
So you have the combatants claiming victory, U.S. intelligence offering a much more limited assessment of the impact, and the U.S. president disagreeing with his own intelligence agencies. That's a lot of conflicting information.
It is, and it really highlights how difficult it can be to get an objective picture in the immediate aftermath. These competing narratives are part of the conflict itself, in a way.
Absolutely. It raises that question. How do these vastly different stories from the countries involved, from intelligence agencies, how do they shape what happens next? How does anyone know what baseline they're even working from?
That's the core challenge, isn't it? These narratives profoundly influence understanding, political positioning, and future actions. It makes diplomacy incredibly difficult when the basic facts are contested so fiercely.
So, speaking of what happens next, with this fragile ceasefire holding, presumably, what are the immediate next steps? Where do the key players turn their attention now?
Well, based on public statements, we see a couple of immediate shifts. First, Israel has indicated it plans to redirect its military focus.
Towards where?
Towards Gaza. And the ongoing situation and battle with Hamas there, this suggests they might feel the immediate threat from Iran is, well, if not eliminated, at least contained for now, allowing them to shift resources.
Okay, so a shift in Israeli military focus. What about the diplomatic track? Especially regarding the nuclear issue.
That's definitely ramping up. We're already seeing reports of U.S. envoys pushing for a return to talks about the Iran nuclear deal, likely at the UN.
So trying to get back to the negotiating table after this major escalation.
Exactly. It shows that while the direct military confrontation might have paused, the underlying strategic issues, particularly Iran's nuclear program, remain very much active and unresolved concerns for the international community.
Right. So let's try and sum this up. We've just walked through a really intense but short 12-day conflict. We saw major missile attacks like the strike on Soroka Hospital, the big Operation True Promise 3 barrage, but also these critical covert operations, Mossad drones disabling launchers inside Iran, the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on nuclear sites like Natanz and Fordo.
And the human cost, too. The panic in Tehran, the fuel shortages, that massive internet blackout imposed by the government.
Yeah, and it all culminated in this fragile ceasefire, brokered by President Trump around June 23rd, 24th, followed immediately by both Iran and Israel claiming, historic victory, while U.S. intelligence suggested maybe a more limited impact, particularly on the nuclear program.
Leading to where we are now, Israel potentially shifting focus to Gaza, and diplomats trying to restart those nuclear talks.
Understanding a conflict like this, even one so short, with all these layers overt, covert, the human side, the competing stories, it really helps you see the bigger picture of international relations, doesn't it?
It really does. It reminds you that what you see on the surface is often just, well, the tip of the iceberg.
So here's something to maybe think about as we wrap up. Consider how fast this conflict blew up and then how quickly it seemed to pause, at least overtly. Yet look at the completely different ways success and impact were described by everyone involved. What does that tell us about modern conflict, about diplomacy, and maybe how much is ever really over just because a ceasefire is signed, especially when the core disagreements are still sitting right there?